Most weak men don't talk too much because they're confident. They talk too much because they're terrified. Terrified of being misunderstood. Terrified of disappointing people. Terrified of silence. Terrified of rejection. Terrified that if they stop explaining themselves for even a moment, someone might finally realize they aren't enough. And modern life quietly rewards this weakness. You see it everywhere now. Long paragraphs defending harmless decisions, apology-filled messages, over-explaining simple boundaries, men rehearsing conversations in their heads before speaking, typing, deleting, rewriting, trying desperately to sound reasonable. Because somewhere along the way, many men became psychologically conditioned to believe that their worth depends on being accepted, understood, approved of, emotionally safe to everyone around them. But there's a disturbing consequence nobody warns you about. The more a man explains himself, the less powerful he appears. And the terrifying part? Most men don't even notice it happening. They think they're being mature, communicative, emotionally intelligent. But beneath the surface, their constant explaining is often nothing more than fear wearing a polite mask. And this is where everything begins to collapse, because the world unconsciously treats men very differently once it senses that fear. Not consciously, not openly, but psychologically. People start interrupting him more, questioning him more, respecting him less, pushing his boundaries further, ignoring his decisions, testing him, and eventually he becomes emotionally exhausted trying to justify his existence to people who were never listening in the first place. But this isn't even the worst part. The worst part is what constant explaining slowly does to a man internally, because after enough years, he stops trusting his own mind. Watch what happens when a man becomes uncomfortable with silence. Someone questions him, and immediately he starts explaining. Too fast, too detailed, too emotional. You can almost hear the anxiety underneath the words. No, what I meant was, I was only trying to. Actually, the reason I did that is because he keeps talking, trying to regain control. But psychologically, he's already lost it, because silence has power most people cannot tolerate anymore, especially in the digital world. Modern men now live inside constant emotional surveillance. Every notification feels urgent. Every message demands response. Every disagreement feels dangerous. Phone glow at 1:13 a.m. A man staring at a screen in a dark apartment, reading the same message over and over, typing, deleting, typing again, trying to craft a perfect explanation so nobody gets upset. And almost nobody notices how psychologically draining this becomes, because the man isn't communicating anymore. He's managing emotional risk. That changes everything. The moment a man becomes addicted to managing other people's emotions, he slowly loses authority over his own, and people unconsciously feel it. This is why calm men often appear more powerful even before they say anything. Not because they're louder, not because they're aggressive, but because they aren't panicking. They don't rush to emotionally clean up every misunderstanding. They can tolerate uncertainty. That's rare now. Most people can't, especially weak men. Weak men feel compelled to explain every decision because they secretly believe they need permission to exist comfortably. And once you see this, you start noticing it everywhere. At work, a man explaining why he took one day off. In relationships, a man over-justifying harmless boundaries. Online, men writing emotional essays defending opinions to strangers who already decided to hate them. And this is where the disturbing realization begins. The explanations are rarely about clarity. They're usually about approval. Weak men often believe they're seeking understanding, but psychologically, they're seeking emotional reassurance. There's a difference. Understanding says, I explained myself once. Validation addiction says, please tell me I'm still acceptable. That's why the explanations never end. One sentence becomes 5. 5 become 20. And even after the conversation ends, the mind keeps replaying it. Did I sound rude? Did they misunderstand me? Should I message again? Should I clarify further? Meanwhile, the emotionally stronger man already moved on hours ago, because secure men understand something insecure men don't. Not everybody needs to understand you. That sentence alone terrifies many men, because they've spent their entire lives trying to avoid disapproval. School trained it into them. Social media amplified it. Corporate culture perfected it. Smile more. Be agreeable. Be accessible. Be emotionally safe. Explain yourself carefully. Never upset anyone. But this creates a dangerous psychological side effect. A man slowly disconnects from his natural instincts. He starts filtering everything, every opinion, every boundary, every emotional reaction, until eventually he no longer knows which thoughts are genuinely his. And this creates a strange modern loneliness, a man surrounded by people, yet emotionally invisible, because nobody actually knows him. They only know the edited version, the softened version, the safe version, the endlessly explaining version. And this is where many men secretly begin collapsing mentally, not dramatically, quietly. Exhaustion, overthinking, emotional numbness, late-night anxiety, constant mental rehearsing. The body stays alive, but psychologically, the man becomes trapped inside permanent self-monitoring. And almost nobody talks about how masculine this exhaustion has become, because men are often expected to suppress emotional pain while simultaneously remaining emotionally available to everybody else. That contradiction destroys people. But this isn't even the darkest part. The darkest part is what manipulators quickly notice. Manipulative people instinctively test emotional weakness, not always consciously, but psychologically they scan for it. And one of the biggest signals of weakness is compulsive explaining, because over-explaining reveals something important. It reveals fear of disapproval. And once someone senses that fear, they gain leverage. Watch toxic dynamics carefully. The manipulator questions everything, challenges tone, twists meanings, acts confused, forces the other person into endless clarification. And weak men fall into this trap constantly. They think, if I explain better, they'll finally understand. No, that's the illusion, because manipulative people often understand perfectly. Confusion is the weapon. The goal isn't clarity. The goal is control. And weak men unknowingly surrender control every time they emotionally scramble for approval. You see this in relationships constantly now. A woman goes cold. A man panics. Suddenly he's sending paragraphs trying to fix invisible tension, explaining, reassuring, defending, apologizing for things he didn't even do. Meanwhile, she says almost nothing, and the silence alone psychologically destabilizes him, because silence exposes insecure attachment faster than words ever could. And this is where many men become trapped in emotional dependency, not because they're weak biologically, but because they've trained themselves to fear disconnection more than humiliation. That changes male behavior completely. A man who fears disconnection will tolerate disrespect far longer than he admits. He'll explain instead of confront, appease instead of detach, negotiate instead of walk away. And slowly, his self-respect erodes in tiny invisible pieces. Not all at once. One compromise at a time. One humiliating explanation at a time. One late-night emotional paragraph at a time. And eventually he reaches a terrifying realization. Nobody respects a man who constantly explains why he deserves respect. There was a time when silence carried mystery. Now silence creates panic, because modern communication removed almost all emotional space from human interaction. Everyone is reachable, trackable, available, seen notifications, typing indicators, read receipts. Technology turned hesitation into insecurity, and weak men suffer from this more than anyone. A message arrives. 5 minutes pass. Suddenly the mind starts spiraling. Did I say something wrong? Are they angry? Should I explain myself? Should I send another message? Phone glow reflecting in tired eyes at 2:07 a.m. An empty kitchen. Cold coffee. A man rereading conversations from 3 days ago, trying to decode emotional signals that may not even exist. And this is where masculine emotional stability quietly dies, because the mind never rests anymore. It performs constantly, explaining constantly, monitoring constantly, anticipating rejection constantly. And the disturbing realization comes later. Most people aren't even thinking about you that deeply. But insecure men project enormous emotional meaning onto tiny social interactions. Why? Because validation became survival, especially online. Social media intensified the psychological disease beyond recognition. Now men don't simply live anymore. They curate themselves. Every post optimized, every opinion softened, every reaction calculated. And eventually, a man becomes terrified of authentic expression because authentic expression risks disapproval. So he explains everything preemptively, adds disclaimers, softens truths, overcontextualizes opinions, trying desperately to avoid conflict. But conflict avoidance comes with a hidden price. People stop feeling your presence. And this is subtle, very subtle, but psychologically devastating, because presence isn't created through excessive words. It's created through emotional certainty, calm energy, grounded behavior, controlled silence. That's why one calm sentence from a secure man often carries more weight than 10 minutes of anxious explanations. And weak men sense this instinctively, which makes them explain even more. There's a specific type of humiliation many men experience privately, and almost nobody talks about it. It happens after the explanation, after the long message, after the emotional clarification, after trying to fix tension that shouldn't have required fixing. Silence, no response, or worse, a cold response, short, detached, emotionally empty. And suddenly the man feels exposed, not because he communicated, but because he revealed desperation. That feeling stays with people longer than they admit, lying awake afterward replaying every sentence, feeling foolish for saying too much, ashamed for needing reassurance. And this creates a brutal internal conflict, because many men are told, communicate more, but nobody teaches them the difference between communication and emotional leaking. Emotionally weak men leak constantly. Their anxiety leaks. Their fear leaks. Their insecurity leaks through excessive explanations. And people unconsciously react to emotional leakage differently than emotional control, even if they never say it directly. This is why some men walk into rooms and immediately command respect without speaking much, while others talk endlessly yet somehow feel invisible. The difference usually isn't intelligence. It's emotional regulation. One man speaks from grounded certainty. The other speaks from fear of rejection. And human beings detect that difference faster than logic can explain, especially in modern dating. Almost nobody notices how attraction collapses when a man begins emotionally over-pursuing clarity, because mystery disappears, tension disappears, emotional polarity disappears. Everything becomes over-explained, over-managed, over-reassured, and eventually the relationship begins feeling emotionally heavy instead of emotionally alive. But this problem goes deeper than dating. It affects identity itself, because a man who constantly explains himself eventually starts living defensively instead of intentionally. And that's where everything becomes dangerous. Weak men often believe over-explaining protects relationships, but over time, it destroys the relationship they have with themselves, because every unnecessary explanation quietly communicates something internally. My natural response is enough. So the man keeps adjusting himself, refining himself, editing himself, softening himself, until eventually he becomes psychologically disconnected from his instincts. And instinct matters more than modern society admits. Not blind aggression, not emotional numbness. Instinct, the ability to feel something immediately without requiring universal approval first. But weak men become terrified of instinct because instinct risks judgment, so they overthink everything instead. Hours spent analyzing harmless interactions, conversations replaying endlessly during showers, mirror reflections with exhausted eyes, a man standing alone in a bathroom at midnight staring at himself, wondering why he feels so emotionally tired all the time. And this is where the hidden tragedy appears. The world sees a nice guy, but internally, the man feels psychologically trapped, because constant self-monitoring destroys inner freedom. Every sentence becomes strategic, every reaction filtered, every truth negotiated. And eventually the man no longer knows whether people genuinely love him or merely tolerate the version of him designed to avoid conflict. That realization breaks people quietly, especially men, because male loneliness often isn't loud. It's silent, functional, invisible, going to work, answering messages, making jokes, acting normal, while internally feeling emotionally disconnected from almost everyone around them. And this is where everything changes, because eventually, some men reach emotional exhaustion. They stop explaining, not out of anger, out of clarity. They finally realize something terrifying. People who genuinely respect you rarely require endless explanations. Strong men are not emotionally cold. That's the misconception. They simply understand that excessive explaining often weakens presence. So they choose words carefully, not fearfully, carefully. They answer without performing, speak without begging for approval, set boundaries without emotional essays. And when misunderstood, they don't immediately collapse psychologically. That's real strength, the ability to tolerate temporary misunderstanding without abandoning yourself. Almost nobody teaches men this anymore, because modern culture rewards emotional overexposure, constant sharing, constant clarifying, constant explaining. But psychologically, there's power in restraint, not fake Sigma silence, not manipulative detachment, calm restraint, the kind that comes from self-trust. A man sitting quietly in his apartment at night, city lights outside the window, phone screen lighting up beside him. A message arrives. He reads it once, then calmly puts the phone back down. No panic, no spiral, no emotional emergency, just silence. And for many men, That level of inner calm feels almost impossible now because they spent years training themselves to fear disapproval more than exhaustion. But eventually reality catches up. The endless explaining stops working. The emotional performance becomes unbearable. The mind grows tired. And the disturbing realization finally arrives. You can spend your entire life trying to make everyone comfortable with who you are and still end up completely alone. Because approval is not connection. Performance is not intimacy. And endless explanations are not strength. Sometimes they're evidence that a man no longer believes his existence can stand on its own, so he keeps talking, clarifying, defending, explaining, hoping the right combination of words will finally earn him peace. But peace never comes that way, because real peace begins the moment a man realizes he does not need to emotionally audition for the right to exist. And once that realization truly sinks in, something strange happens. The desperation fades. The overthinking slows. The compulsive explaining begins dying quietly. And for the first time in years, the man starts feeling present again. Not perfect, not emotionless, not untouchable, just real, and in a world addicted to performance. That may be the rarest form of power left. If this video spoke to something you've been silently carrying, subscribe. Because almost nobody is talking honestly about what modern life is psychologically doing to men.